Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I tell real stories from Thailand. Some come from emails you send me, others come from people I meet while living here. These stories are real. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're painful, but they all show what life out here is really like for foreigners in the beautiful nation of Thailand. Before we start, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share new stories just like this one. True stories from the expats, the travelers, and the dreamers who come to Thailand looking for something new. You don't want to miss them. This one came from an email I got yesterday, but this time it's different from the others. It's not written by tourists getting their bank account drained while chasing romance. This time it's from a wife, a married female expat from the United States. I am sharing my experience because I want people to understand how retirement abroad can shift from peaceful to painful in ways you do not expect. I'm from the United States of America, and after 32 years of marriage, I believed I had reached a point in life where things would finally become simple. I sent this story to the channel because I have watched many people talk about the reality of life in Thailand, and I want my story to be part of that conversation. Before I continue, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. These stories take a significant amount of effort to write, organize, and share, and subscribing is the most effective way to keep this community growing. If you appreciate real accounts from ordinary people who have lived through difficult situations in Thailand, then subscribing will help ensure that these stories continue to be told. When my husband and I decided to retire, we believed Chiang Mai would be the perfect place. We had visited Thailand multiple times, and we always felt comfortable there. The lifestyle was slower, the cost of living made retirement less stressful, and the atmosphere made us feel relaxed. We thought we had done everything right. We worked demanding jobs throughout our entire adult lives. We raised our children. We put money aside. We made sacrifices. When the time came to choose a retirement destination, we wanted a place that felt peaceful and affordable. And Chiang Mai seemed to check every box. During our first months in Chiang Mai, I felt grateful every single day. I enjoyed the morning walks, the markets, the quiet afternoons, and even the sound of the city settling into the evening. I thought we had finally earned this peace. After 32 years of marriage, it felt like we were entering a new chapter that would bring us closer together. We had spent decades dealing with responsibilities. Now, we finally had time to breathe. At first, everything went smoothly. We rented a small house, met a few expats, and learned our way around the neighborhood. My husband seemed relaxed and content. He commented often about how grateful he felt to be away from stress. We ate simple meals, talked about hobbies we wanted to explore, and enjoyed the slower routine. I had no reason to suspect that anything bad was coming. Slowly, things started to change. It began with small details, the kind you can dismiss if you want to believe everything is fine. My husband started going out alone more often. He said he wanted to explore the city, take a walk, or clear his mind. This did not seem suspicious at first, because it made sense that he would want to get familiar with the area. But as time passed, these outings became longer and more frequent. Sometimes he left early in the afternoon and came home at night. When I asked what he had been doing, he gave vague answers. He said he was talking to people or enjoying the weather. He never named specific locations or activities. His relationship with his phone also changed. In the United States of America, he never acted secretive with his phone. We shared everything. When we moved to Chiang Mai, he suddenly kept the phone next to him at all times. He placed it face down. He stepped outside the house when it rang. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, he clicked the screen off quickly. I asked him who kept calling, but he always gave short answers and changed the subject. After 32 years of marriage, these behaviors felt wrong. But I tried to avoid jumping to conclusions because I did not want to believe anything harmful was happening. His appearance changed next. He began buying new clothes, and the style was completely unlike the clothing he had worn for decades. He bought fashionable shirts, new shoes, and cologne he had never used before. He spent more time fixing his hair. I asked him why he suddenly cared so much about his appearance when we were retired and living a simple life. He said he just wanted to look refreshed, and that Chiang Mai made him feel inspired. Instead of reassuring me, his answer felt incomplete and dismissive. Something felt off. The moment everything connected was when I heard the name May. I was at a cafe with two expats I had recently met. They talked casually about people in the nightlife areas of Chiang Mai. They mentioned a young bar worker named May. They talked about how she often targeted foreign men who seemed financially comfortable. They described situations where men spent large amounts of money on her and how she had a habit of becoming emotionally involved with them quickly. I listened, but at the time, it felt like regular gossip. I did not think the name had anything to do with me. That changed a few hours later. My husband was sitting at the table when his phone lit up. Before he could block the screen, I saw the name May appear in a notification. He grabbed the phone instantly. My heart sank. Everything made sense in that moment. The outings, the clothes, the cologne, the guarded phone, the sudden coldness. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I asked him who May was. He said she was just someone he talked to near a local bar. He said it was harmless and that I was reading too much into it. His tone was unusually sharp. After 32 years together, I could hear that he was lying. That night, when he fell asleep, I looked through his phone because I needed to know the truth. I did not want to invade his privacy, but his behavior had crossed lines that made me feel I had no choice. The messages were worse than I expected. They were flirtatious. They were affectionate. They discussed meeting repeatedly. They included details that confirmed he had formed an emotional connection with her. I remember staring at the screen, feeling shock, betrayal, and anger. 32 years of partnership were being treated like a disposable item. I felt like I had become invisible. The next morning, I confronted him. He denied everything at first, then tried to minimize it, then became irritated that I looked at his phone. He said I was controlling. He said he deserved freedom. He said I was making a big deal out of nothing. His personality shifted so drastically that I barely recognized him. The man I married was gone. From that point forward, our marriage unraveled quickly. He left the house even more. When he returned, he was distant, dismissive, and cold. He behaved like someone who had mentally checked out of the relationship. I could feel it every minute. It was as if the 32 years we spent building a life together meant nothing to him anymore. After my husband's personality shifted and the truth about his connection to May became clear, the situation moved in a direction I never imagined. I had known him for more than half my life, and yet I suddenly felt like I was living with a stranger. Everything about the way he carried himself changed. His tone, his priorities, his habits, and even the way he looked at me felt unfamiliar. I kept thinking that maybe he was going through a temporary crisis, but every day confirmed that whatever was happening had gone far beyond anything temporary. Not long after discovering the messages, I tried having calm conversations with him. I told him I wanted to understand what he was feeling, why he was acting so distant, and what had caused him to shift away from the life we built. Instead of answering honestly, he became defensive. He accused me of overreacting. He said I was focusing on negativity. He said retirement had changed him and that he wanted to enjoy himself. The more I tried to talk, the more he shut down or lashed out. It was clear he wanted to avoid any responsibility for what he was doing. His outings became even more frequent. He started staying out late into the night. He came home smelling like alcohol and unfamiliar perfume. He stopped telling me where he was going. He said he did not have to report to me anymore. I found myself living with someone who seemed eager to separate himself from our marriage. I kept hoping he would realize the damage he was causing, but he only sunk deeper into this new behavior. One afternoon, an older expat woman who lived a few houses away pulled me aside when she saw me walking to the market. She said she did not want to cause problems, but felt I should know that my husband had been seen frequently in an area known for nightlife. She said he was spending time with a young woman who seemed very affectionate with him. She asked if I knew anything about it. Hearing confirmation from someone else made everything inside me tighten. I thanked her and walked home, trying to keep myself together. Eventually, I gathered the courage to follow him one night. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. He left the house around 7 in the evening, dressed in one of his new shirts, wearing the cologne he bought. I waited a few minutes and then walked the same direction. I followed at a distance and watched him enter a crowded area full of bars and neon signs. I stood far enough away to avoid being noticed. After a short time, I saw him walk out of one of the bars with May. She was much younger than him, and she was holding his arm. They leaned into each other, laughing and touching each other in a way that confirmed everything. It was not just messages. It was not just emotional involvement. It was a full relationship. I stood there watching the man I had been married to for 32 years behave like a teenager chasing excitement. It felt unreal. I felt humiliation, sadness, and anger all at once, but I stayed hidden and observed. The next day, I confronted him again. I told him what I saw. Instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, he told me that I was spying on him. He said I was suffocating him. He said he was tired of being judged. I reminded him of the decades we spent together, but he was unmoved. He said he deserved happiness and that I needed to let him live his life. Hearing that from the person I had supported through every major event of his adult life was like being hit in the chest. Over the next months, the situation escalated. He became entirely focused on May. He started giving her money. At first, it was small amounts, but then it grew rapidly. He started withdrawing from our shared retirement savings. When I questioned him, he said it was his money too, and he could spend it however he wanted. He did not care that we had planned for that money to support both of us for the rest of our lives. He acted as if May had become the most important person in his world, and he dismissed every concern I raised. I discovered he was paying her rent, covering her bills, buying her gifts, and giving her cash almost daily. He justified it by claiming she needed help. He said she came from a difficult background and that he felt responsible for improving her life. I tried explaining that bar workers often say whatever they think a foreigner wants to hear, especially when money is involved. He refused to listen. He insisted she cared about him. He said she treated him better than I did. After 32 years of marriage, hearing that was devastating. During this time, I started learning more about May. I never sought out information, but people in the local community talked openly. Some expats who had lived in Chiang Mai longer than we had recognized her name immediately. Several of them told me privately that she had a known pattern of attaching herself to older foreign men. They said she was married to a Thai man and that her husband worked with her to extract money from foreigners. They said many men had already fallen into the same trap. Some had lost thousands of dollars. Some had lost everything. Hearing these details made my stomach turn. I gathered screenshots and messages from community forums, social media posts, and expat groups. The information was consistent. May was not a victim. She was someone who had been doing this for years. I showed all of this to my husband, thinking that if he saw concrete proof, he would recognize what was happening and step away before more damage was done. Instead, he became angry. He accused me of trying to ruin his happiness. He said I was jealous. He said I did not understand her. He told me I was being hateful. He rejected every piece of evidence. It was as if he had been brainwashed. I watched him sink deeper into denial. He insisted May loved him. He insisted she was loyal. He insisted she was different. Eventually, he made the decision to move out. He packed some of his belongings and left to live with her. He did not ask how I felt. He did not discuss our future. He did not show gratitude for the decades we had spent together. He simply left, as if our entire marriage had been nothing more than a chapter he no longer wanted to read. He moved into her apartment, and within weeks, our retirement savings account had significantly decreased. He continued giving her money constantly. I could see the damage happening in real time, and I could not do anything to stop it. Every attempt to reason with him failed. He had chosen her over everything we built. I stayed alone in the house, feeling abandoned and humiliated. I kept hoping he would come to his senses, but every time I heard from someone in the community, the stories only got worse. She was taking money from him faster than I imagined possible. She had no interest in a real relationship. She only saw him as a source of income. I watched helplessly as the life I thought I had unraveled piece by piece. When my husband moved in with May, I felt like the ground under my life had collapsed. I had spent 32 years believing that marriage meant stability, loyalty, and partnership. Seeing him walk away so easily made me question everything. I kept replaying our past in my mind, wondering if I had missed signs earlier in our marriage, wondering if he had always been capable of this, or if something in him had simply changed the moment we arrived in Chiang Mai. No matter how much I thought about it, none of it made sense. I kept trying to remind myself that I was not the one who broke our marriage, but the emotional weight still hit me every day. After he moved out, I started hearing more details about what was happening through different people in the local community. Chiang Mai has a way of spreading information quickly, especially within the expat circles. It seemed like almost everyone knew more about May than I did, even though she was now directly involved in destroying my marriage. People approached me quietly when they saw me alone at the market or walking to the local shop. They wanted to offer support, but they also wanted to warn me. They had heard stories about her long before I had. They told me that several foreign men had experienced similar issues with her, that she had a pattern of forming connections, draining financial resources, and then disappearing. Listening to these stories made me feel sick. I had tried to warn my husband about her, and he refused to believe anything. He insisted that she cared about him genuinely. He insisted that everyone else was lying. He insisted that she was different. I realized quickly that trying to reason with him had become pointless. He was operating on emotion, not logic. And unfortunately, the emotion he was following had nothing to do with our marriage. During this time, my life felt completely stalled. I could not focus. I could not sleep properly. I could not stop thinking about how 32 years had been discarded for someone who saw him as nothing more than an opportunity. I had spent decades being a supportive partner, and now I was sitting alone in a foreign country, trying to make sense of what direction my life was supposed to take next. The loneliness hit me harder than I expected. I knew people in Chiang Mai, but they were not close enough to offer the emotional support I needed. I spent most days in silence, trying to figure out how to hold myself together. Meanwhile, my husband's situation with May escalated. He withdrew money constantly. He bought her expensive items. He paid for her family's needs. I knew this because several expats who knew her routine said they had seen them at shops, markets, and restaurants where she directed him on what to buy. Hearing these details felt like constant emotional stabbing. I had shared a life with this man, and now he was behaving like a helpless wallet for someone who was clearly manipulating him. The more money he spent, the more reckless he became. He ignored calls from our children. He stopped communicating with extended family. He became distant and aggressive whenever I tried to contact him. One day, he told me that he was happier than he had ever been, and that I needed to stop trying to interfere. It was shocking to hear that level of disrespect from someone who used to be reasonable and responsible. It was like living in a distorted version of reality where nothing made sense anymore. As the months passed, I began focusing on my own life again, because I realized that I could not waste my energy trying to fix someone who did not want help. I started joining small community gatherings and language classes. I forced myself to maintain a routine. I reminded myself that even though my marriage was collapsing, I still had the right to build a life that was stable and healthy. It was not easy, but I needed to start reclaiming my identity. Then one day, something changed. He showed up at the door of the house we had rented in Chiang Mai. He looked shaken, exhausted, and older than I had ever seen him. He did not look like the confident man who had stormed out months earlier. He looked like someone who had been broken by the consequences of his own decisions. I opened the door, and he walked in without asking. I let him because after 3 decades of knowing him, I still felt the weight of our history, even if I no longer recognized the person he had become. He sat down and told me that May had disappeared. She had taken his money, his belongings, and even some important documents. He said he did not know where she went. He said he had contacted her repeatedly, but she had blocked him everywhere. He said he had gone to her apartment, but everything inside was gone. It was completely empty. Her neighbors told him she had moved out suddenly and without warning. They did not know where she went either. Hearing this did not surprise me. I had been expecting this outcome for months, but seeing my husband finally face the consequences of his choices brought a strange combination of emotions. Part of me felt sad for him because I knew he had been manipulated. Another part of me felt angry because he had ignored every warning. And another part of me felt numb because too much damage had already been done to our marriage for me to feel sympathy in the way I once would have. He told me he had lost a large amount of our retirement savings. He said he could not access certain accounts because she had taken some of the documents. He kept saying that he could not believe she would do this. He said he thought she loved him. He said he thought she cared. Listening to his denial fade into confusion was difficult, but it did not erase the pain he caused me. He asked me for help. That was the moment I realized the marriage was fully broken. He wanted me to step in and fix things for him the way I had done throughout our entire life together. But this situation was not something I could repair. The trust was gone. The respect was gone. The partnership was gone. 32 years of marriage had been destroyed, and the damage could not be undone. I told him I could not continue living like this. I told him I needed to protect myself emotionally and financially. I told him that he had made choices that had long-term consequences, and I could no longer carry the burden of those choices for him. Saying these things out loud felt surreal, but I knew it had to be done. After he left that day, I sat in silence and realized that I had already been alone for months emotionally. Formalizing that reality was only the final step. I decided I needed to leave Thailand and rebuild my life elsewhere because staying in Chiang Mai meant staying in the shadow of everything that had happened. There was nothing here left for our marriage, and I needed to move forward. Once I accepted that my marriage was over, I knew I had to make practical decisions quickly. I had been emotionally drained for months, and staying in Chiang Mai felt like living inside a reminder of a life that no longer existed. I decided to return to the United States of America. It was the only place that felt familiar enough to help me ground myself again. I contacted my mother and explained the situation. She told me to come home immediately and assured me I could stay with her until I figured out my next steps. Hearing her voice gave me a sense of relief I had not felt in a long time. I realized how much I had isolated myself during this entire ordeal. Before leaving Chiang Mai, I had to wrap up the final responsibilities that came with ending a shared life in a foreign country. I closed local accounts, handled rental agreements, and organized my belongings. While doing this, I experienced a strange mix of sadness and clarity. Sadness because I had believed that Chiang Mai would be the place where my husband and I would enjoy a peaceful retirement together. Clarity because I finally understood that I had been holding on to a version of my marriage that no longer existed. Letting go felt painful, but I knew staying would only prolong my suffering. During this time, my husband continued trying to talk to me. He acted confused, hurt, and disoriented. Not because he had lost me, but because he had lost May and the fantasy he built around her. Every time he spoke, he asked for help or advice on how to recover from what she had done. He never apologized in a meaningful way. He never acknowledged the emotional destruction he caused. He simply wanted me to step into my old role and fix the chaos he created. I refused. I stayed calm and told him clearly that he had made choices that I could not clean up for him. I was no longer responsible for his decisions. I booked my flight and packed what I could. As I walked through our house one last time, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. But it was different from the weight I had been carrying for months. This weight was a mix of sadness and acceptance. I was closing a chapter that had been part of my identity for more than 3 decades. I told myself that leaving did not mean I failed. It meant I was choosing to value myself again. I wished I had come to that realization sooner. But coming to it late was still better than never coming to it at all. The trip back to the United States of America was exhausting. Sitting on that long flight, I replayed everything that happened. I thought about the messages, the lies, the denial, the money he threw away, and the way he discarded our marriage. I felt anger, but I also felt something new. I felt determination. There was no future in mourning a man who had treated me like I was disposable. I told myself that from this point forward, I would build a life for myself, even if I had to rebuild everything from scratch. When I finally arrived home, my mother hugged me longer than she ever had before. She knew the situation without me needing to explain every detail. She let me stay in her house and gave me space to process everything. For the first few weeks, I did not do much. I needed time to recover emotionally. I had spent so many months bracing myself for the next painful discovery that it felt strange to live in a place where I did not have to be on alert. The quiet of my mother's home allowed me to think clearly for the first time since everything started falling apart. Eventually, I knew I had to start rebuilding my life in practical ways. My retirement plan had been heavily damaged by the money he gave away, so I needed to work again. I had experience in corporate management, so I decided that finding a job in that field was my best option. I updated my resume, started applying for positions, and reached out to former colleagues. Getting back into the workforce after retiring was not easy, but I reminded myself that I had built a career once, and I could do it again if I stayed focused. The job search took time, but eventually I received an offer from a company looking for someone with management experience. Accepting that position felt like taking a major step forward. It meant that I was no longer stuck in the shadow of what had happened in Chiang Mai. It meant that I was building something new with my own effort. My confidence began to return slowly. I had spent months feeling powerless, and now I was making decisions that gave me control over my future again. Living with my mother also helped me heal in ways I did not expect. She listened when I needed to talk, and she stayed quiet when I needed space. She reminded me that what happened was not my fault. Hearing those words repeatedly was more valuable than I realized. For so long, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, wondering if I had missed something obvious. My mother told me that people sometimes lose themselves, and when they do, they make destructive choices that have nothing to do with the people around them. Her perspective helped me let go of some of the guilt I had been carrying. As weeks passed, I started developing a routine. I worked during the day and spent evenings organizing my finances and planning for the future. I connected with friends I had not seen in years. I joined local groups and reached out to people who had gone through similar situations. Talking to others who had experienced betrayal helped me feel less alone. I started to realize that healing was not a single moment, but a long process that required patience and consistency. One day, I received a message from my husband. He said he wanted to reconcile. He said he missed me. He said he wanted to come back to the United States of America and restart our life together. Reading his message made me feel calm, not conflicted. I no longer felt torn between history and reality. I simply told him that our marriage was over. I told him that I did not want to rebuild something that he had destroyed so deeply. I told him that I had finally found stability again, and that I did not want to step backward into a life filled with pain and distrust. After sending that message, I felt a sense of strength I had not felt in a long time. I realized that I had done something that earlier in the year I would not have believed myself capable of. I had chosen myself. I had chosen my future. I had chosen a life free from manipulation, lies, and emotional abandonment. I continued focusing on my work, my personal growth, and my financial recovery. Every day that passed, I felt more like myself. Not the version of me defined by 32 years of marriage, but the version of me who could stand alone and build a life with confidence. After settling into my new routine and gaining stability again, I began seeing my life in a completely different way. When you spend 32 years in a marriage, you build a sense of identity around being part of a pair. You plan everything as a couple. You build long-term goals based on what you assume the other person will value. You compromise. You sacrifice. You think of yourself as one half of something. When that is suddenly gone, you have to rebuild your identity from the ground up. I did not realize how much of myself I had wrapped around the idea of being a wife until the moment I was forced to live without that title. At first, the loss felt overwhelming, but over time, I started discovering parts of myself that had been buried under decades of routine. Work became a powerful part of that transformation. Returning to corporate management gave me structure again. I was handling projects, coordinating teams, and making decisions that had real impact. I was using skills I had not accessed in years. At first, I worried that my age or my time away from the workforce would make the transition too difficult. But once I started working again, my confidence returned quickly. I realized I had not lost my abilities. I had only stopped using them because I thought retirement would be the phase of life where I no longer needed them. In a strange way, returning to work gave me back the sense of self that I had been missing. I also started noticing how much mental space I had gained by removing myself from my husband's chaos. When I lived in Chiang Mai and spent every day wondering what he was doing, what he was hiding, and how much money he was giving away, my mind was constantly in a state of stress and fear. Back then, I felt like I was shrinking. Now I felt like I was expanding again. I could focus on my goals. I could think about the future. I could make decisions without worrying about someone else undermining them. The peace I felt was not the same kind of peace I had expected in retirement, but it was a peace that came from independence and clarity. During this period, my husband contacted me again. He called, emailed, and sent messages through mutual acquaintances. His tone shifted each time. Some days he sounded desperate. Some days he sounded apologetic. Some days he acted as if nothing had happened and wanted to talk casually. It became clear that he was emotionally unstable and still trying to find a way to anchor himself after May disappeared with his money. I listened to his words, but I no longer felt responsible for him. I no longer felt emotionally tied to fixing the damage he created. I had already given decades of my life to supporting him. I had nothing left to offer. My refusal to take him back forced me to confront something I had not fully processed. For years, I had been the one who made sure things stayed together. I was the one who managed problems, planned ahead, and held the household steady whenever life became stressful. In the past, when challenges appeared, I stepped in automatically. I did not even question it. But now, for the first time, I allowed myself to put down that responsibility. I realized that saving him would mean losing myself again, and I was not willing to do that. As weeks turned into months, I focused on rebuilding not just my practical life, but my emotional foundation. I joined support groups online for people who had experienced betrayal in long-term relationships. I talked with others who had gone through similar situations abroad. Hearing their experiences helped me understand that what happened to me was not rare. Many people who retire in foreign countries fall into situations where their partners get caught up in illusions, temptations, or manipulative relationships. I learned that I was not alone, and that knowledge brought a lot of comfort. I also started taking small steps to enjoy life again. I went to lunch with coworkers. I took long walks in the evenings. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. I visited parks where I could sit quietly and appreciate the feeling of stability around me. These small moments mattered more than I expected. They reminded me that a peaceful life does not require a specific location or a partner. It requires emotional safety, clarity, and the freedom to make choices that protect your well-being. During this time, I reflected often on Chiang Mai. I did not regret moving there. I regretted what happened, but I did not regret experiencing another culture or exploring a different way of living. The city itself was not the problem. The problem was that my husband reacted to retirement by trying to reinvent himself through someone who exploited him. The lifestyle offered him freedom, but he used that freedom recklessly. Chiang Mai only amplified what was already broken inside him. I had to accept that his actions were not a reflection of my worth, they were a reflection of his instability. It took me a long time to internalize that truth. For months, I kept asking myself what I could have done differently. Over time, I realized that nothing would have changed. His decisions were made before I even understood what was happening. He was committed to chasing something that never existed, and I was simply caught in the fallout. Eventually, I reached a point where I could think about the future without feeling weighed down by the past. I began saving money aggressively. I created new long-term goals. I considered the possibility of moving into my own place once I felt financially ready. I focused on my health, my friendships, and my professional growth. I started feeling proud of myself again. Not proud in a superficial way, but proud because I had survived something that could have destroyed me emotionally. One of the biggest realizations I had during this time was that being alone did not mean being lonely. In fact, I felt lonelier during the months I lived with my husband in Chiang Mai than I ever felt living with my mother or on my own in the United States of America. Loneliness is not about being physically alone. It is about being emotionally abandoned. Once I understood that, I stopped fearing the idea of building a life without him. I also learned to trust myself again. For a long time, I felt ashamed that I had stayed in Chiang Mai for as long as I did. I felt embarrassed that I had tried so hard to fix something that was already broken. But eventually I realized that trying to save a long-term marriage is not a weakness. It is a natural response from someone who values commitment. The strength came from knowing when to stop trying and walk away. Now, when I think about everything that happened, I do not feel anger the way I once did. I feel clarity. I feel grounded. I feel aware of my own strength. I went through a painful experience, but it forced me to rediscover parts of myself that I had ignored for years. It pushed me to rebuild my independence. It reminded me that my value does not depend on someone else recognizing it. For the first time in many years, I started feeling hopeful about my future. Not because I had a perfect plan, but because I had learned that I was capable of surviving the worst part of my life and rebuilding from the ground up. As I continued rebuilding my life, I eventually reached the part of the journey where I could reflect on everything with clarity instead of pain. I realized that what happened in Chiang Mai marked the end of one version of myself and the beginning of another. When you spend 32 years in a marriage, your identity becomes intertwined with that relationship. When that relationship falls apart in an abrupt and humiliating way, you either let it break you completely or you learn how to rebuild. I chose to rebuild. It was not easy or quick. It required letting go of everything I thought my future would look like. But it also allowed me to discover a version of myself that I had not seen in decades. Once I had been working steadily for a while, I became financially stable again. I put money aside every month. I paid attention to my expenses. I built a savings plan that fit my new reality. I told myself that even if I had to work longer than I initially expected, it would be worth it because I was building a future that belonged solely to me. I no longer had to worry about someone else sabotaging it. I no longer had to worry about shared finances being drained by irresponsible decisions. That sense of financial control brought me more emotional security than I expected. As time went on, I also began to understand the difference between rebuilding your life and reclaiming your life. Rebuilding means starting from scratch because circumstances forced you to. Reclaiming means taking back the parts of yourself that you gave up or suppressed for years. Both processes were happening at the same time for me. I rebuilt my career. I rebuilt my financial foundation. I rebuilt my independence. But I also reclaimed my voice. I reclaimed my confidence. I reclaimed my right to put myself first. When I lived with my husband, I normalized compromise to the point where I forgot what it felt like to make choices purely based on my own needs. After the situation with May, I realized how much of myself I had lost by constantly prioritizing someone else's comfort. I had hidden parts of myself to avoid conflict. I had softened my reactions to keep the peace. I had adjusted my expectations because I thought marriage required that level of constant sacrifice. But now that I was living for myself, I understood that compromise becomes unhealthy when it is only happening in one direction. I also learned to let go of the shame when people experience betrayal, especially after such a long marriage. Shame becomes one of the strongest emotions. I was ashamed that I had trusted him. I was ashamed that I tried to save the marriage long after it had already fallen apart. I was ashamed that I stayed in Chiang Mai even when I knew something was wrong. But as time passed, I realized that shame does not belong to the person who stayed loyal. Shame belongs to the person who broke the loyalty. Once I understood that truth, my healing accelerated. During my healing process, I also received occasional updates about my husband through mutual acquaintances. He had returned to the United States of America eventually, but he struggled financially and emotionally. He tried reaching out to our children, but their relationship with him became strained because they saw the pain he caused. I did not take any satisfaction in that. I did not want him to suffer. I simply wanted distance. I had already spent enough energy dealing with the consequences of his decisions. I no longer felt any need to track his life or involve myself in his issues. Instead, I focused on building something meaningful for myself. I invested time into friendships. I set personal goals. I took small trips, nothing extravagant, just enough to remind myself that I could enjoy life without feeling tied to someone else's expectations. I also spent more time with my mother. Her presence helped me stay grounded. She reminded me that I had value outside of my marriage and that my future did not depend on someone else validating me. One of the most important breakthroughs in my healing came when I realized how strong I had become. At the beginning of this journey, I felt weak, broken, and confused. I felt like I had lost everything, but the longer I lived on my own terms, the more I saw myself growing. I did not depend on anyone emotionally or financially. I was stable. I was responsible. I was resilient. I looked back at the version of myself who lived in fear and uncertainty in Chiang Mai and realized that I had come farther than I ever expected. After many months of adjusting, healing, and rebuilding, I finally reached a point where I could breathe without feeling weighed down by the past. I could talk about the experience without crying. I could reflect on it without anger. I could accept it without feeling like a failure. I understood that sometimes life forces you into painful situations in order to push you into a future where you are stronger and wiser. There were days when I sat quietly and thought about what my life would have looked like if things had gone the way I originally planned. I imagined my husband and me living peacefully in Chiang Mai, exploring the city, relaxing, and enjoying the retirement we worked so hard for. That image used to hurt. But eventually, I realized that it was only a fantasy. The man I thought I married was not the man he became. The peaceful future I imagined was never truly possible because his decisions made it impossible. Accepting that truth allowed me to release the life I thought I should have had. By the time I felt fully grounded, I realized that I had built a life I was proud of. It was not the life I expected, but it was a life that represented strength, independence, and self-respect. I learned that starting over in your later years is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of resilience. It is a sign that you can still grow, still build, still thrive, even after losing something that once defined your entire world. In the end, my experience in Thailand changed me permanently, but not in the way I feared. Yes, it broke my marriage. Yes, it forced me to confront betrayal, humiliation, and loss. But it also pushed me to discover a part of myself that had been dormant for years. It pushed me to rebuild a life that belonged only to me. It taught me that I am stronger than any betrayal and more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. People often say that hardship reveals who you truly are. After everything I went through, I understand that now. I learned that I am not defined by my husband's choices. I am not defined by the betrayal. I am defined by how I rebuilt myself after the collapse. That rebuilding became the foundation of the best version of myself. A version that values independence, protects personal peace, and knows her worth fully. When I look at my life today, I feel something I did not expect to feel again. I feel whole. And I know now that I did not lose myself in Thailand. I found myself there even though the process was painful. I found the strength I had forgotten. I found the clarity I needed. I found the beginning of a new life that I built by myself, for myself.